really a decision market is, or a prediction market is just a slightly more sophisticated version of democracy, which I'm not a fan of at all. So what you're doing is you're saying, well, okay, what's the collective opinion of these kibitzers? If this collective opinion is valuable, you might get a good move. If it's not, it won't be. If these people don't know anything about chess, they're not going to get a good, you're not going to get a good result out of them. There's the famous Carlyle quote, or a quote that should be famous, which is, he says, in respect to democracy, not prediction markets, he says, it's a common estimate that out of every 10 people, 9 are fools. And by no method, no ballot box, no Birmingham machinery whatsoever, can you grind out wisdom from these 10 people, except by removing the votes of 9 of them, and in some way canceling them and reducing them to 0. So the question is, basically, if you're going to ask, is this an effective way to make decisions, you have to actually look at this market and say, does this market consist of chess players? So actually, in a prediction market, there's a solution to that problem of Carlyle's. The solution is essentially a Darwinian solution. The solution is, first of all, you're not weighting each kibitzer's vote equally. You're weighting them by the amount of money they're willing to bet. Moreover, if you iterate that market, what you'll see is that the people who are fools are going to lose money and be driven out of the market. The people who are actually chess players and can actually know that pawn to bishop 4 is not a good move are going to win. And so over time, what you're getting is this Darwinian effect in which the market is being trained. It's being trained by removing the fools, stripping them of their money, and rewarding the actual chess players in this market. So one of the reasons we associate good performance with markets is that we're thinking of markets that are well trained. So the stock market, to a certain extent, is well trained. Certainly, people have been playing the stock market for a long time. Fools come in, they lose their money, and the people who know how to analyze actual company performance win. So when we think of markets, we think of well-trained markets. And it's important to realize that markets are not magic. That training effect actually has to happen. It has to work. You have to get a consensus of people who actually know how to play chess, who are dominant in that market, before that market will play a good game of chess. So that's really the first question that you have to ask about any market when you're asking, will this market make good predictions? The second question is a little more subtle. You have to ask if the players in that market are disinterested. So let me give an example, again, in the world of chess. Let's say that there's a side bet on, totally outside this prediction market, there's a side bet. Someone is betting that white will actually open with pawn to bishop 4. Now that's a very unlikely move for white. So one would expect fairly good odds if you bet on that and you're right. You could actually make a lot of money with that bet if you bet on it and you're right. So let's say the amount of money that you're going to make from the side bet is X. So the question is, can I move this market so that white will open with pawn to bishop 4 in order to make my profit X? The right question is, to see whether this behavior will happen, the question is, how much do I need to spend to move this market? And let's call that answer Y. So if I spend Y betting in this market that white will move pawn to bishop 4, then how can I get this market to, how can I get this bet? How can I get the market odds to say what clearly isn't true, which is that this is a good move for white? So that answer depends on the depth of the market. It depends on the depth and the liquidity of the market. So clearly, markets rely on supply and demand. If I buy stock in white pawn to bishop 4, the price of white pawn to bishop 4 is going to go up. If I buy enough stock in white pawn to bishop 4, the price of that will go up above 50-50, and the market will say, pawn to bishop 4 is an awful good move for white. So the question is, who am I betting against? How deep is the market of players in this? How well trained? Not only how well trained is this market, but how much weight is behind the judgment? How much monetary weight is behind the judgment that pawn to bishop 4 is actually not a good move? This is an empirical question about markets. So, and it's an empirical question about this specific market. So the question in the specific market is, what is X? How much can I gain by making a bad move? And what is Y? What is the cost of compelling this market to make a bad move? If X is greater than Y, this is going to happen. And so essentially what you have to ascertain if you're going to expect this market to make a good decision for you, you have to ascertain that there are no side bets being made on, there are none of these conflicts of interest, and you have to ascertain that basically Y is going to be greater than X for all purposes. You have to ascertain that actually the power of money that wants to stabilize the market is not as great as the power of money that wants to move the market. Now, there's an immediate problem in market design here, which is how do you know, as the designer of the decision market, how do you know what Y is, what X is? How do you know the value that can be earned from making a bad bet? Well, you don't know what bets people are making on this game outside of the market, so you really don't know Y. Furthermore, you don't control X because how much good money, how much wise money is there in this market? You don't know that. So essentially, the only answer that you can give is you really need to eliminate the scenario in one way or another. Now, Professor Hansen can answer this, but when I read Professor Hansen's paper, the impression that I got from his equations was that he'd simply come up with a way of assuming that since X is finite and Y is infinite, that you can never move a market and make money this way. Clearly, if you adopt that assumption that X must be finite and Y must be infinite, Professor Hansen is right. I think that's what's sometimes called the skyhook, where an entire system of reasoning depends on an unsubstantiated proposition. And I think that when you extend this proposition to government and you say, well, how much can be made by making the government make a bad decision? That number is essentially infinite. Then you look at, well, how well trained is this market? How many people, how many chess players are there who know how to make good government decisions? Well, who has experience running a government? Anyone in this room? I would say very few. And so essentially what you're looking at with futarchy is you're looking at a market which can be manipulated for enormous profit. You're looking at a completely untrained market. And so it misses both criterion. It's neither disinterested nor well-trained. And so basically, because it fails on both, I would say retarded.